Mr. DesJarlais. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the panel for being here today. Wanted to talk about a couple of different things. Mr. Brandenberger, in Tennessee we have a lot of poultry. Hubbard LLC in Pikeville, Tennessee. I don't know if you know Jay Daniels, the Director of Operations. We've sat down and had many discussions. I believe he said about 85% of the cost for them is in feed. So this has a huge impact. We also have Tyson in Shelbyville, Tennessee, and I know you're turkey, these are chickens. But what is the amount of corn and that this needs compared to other livestock? What type of
Well, and you're right. I can speak a little more specifically to the amount of what feed costs in turkey production. For turkey, it's about 70 to 75% of the cost of production. So pretty similar to the numbers you're quoting for chicken. I think the most telling thing is there isn't any real substitute for the corn. Yes, there's some byproducts from ethanol production that can be blended in a little bit, but it's not a one-for-one substitution. When corn becomes less available, prices go up. I think it's very telling the way the livestock and poultry industry have chosen to handle it. We're buying 1.5 billion fewer bushels of corn now than we were when the RFS was created.
So that's your biggest competitor, really, to bring in lower cost to the consumer in the stores, is your competition with the ethanol program?
That's the way it's turned out. I'm sure that's not what Congress intended.
Okay, and you can't use the distilled dried grain or the DDGs with turkey, and they really can't with chicken.
Well, that's the byproduct emission. We can use it in a limited amount. Some would try to characterize this as, oh, well, it's no problem. We put the distiller's grains back into the market. That's not true. In turkeys, as a rule, 10% of the feed ration is about the maximum a distiller's grain can go. And distiller's grains are not of equal quality. Poorer quality grains, you're lucky to get to 5% you can blend in.
Okay, Mr. Gerard, I want to talk a little bit about small engines. This is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. I just cleaned out my storage shed, and I have a pressure washer, a weed eater, and a lawnmower that about $1,000 worth of equipment that were initially damaged by ethanol fuel, or the 10% ethanol. It damaged the fuel lines. I've had all these repaired once. I try to buy pure gasoline for them, but I have teenage boys who I think have put the wrong kind in. And it's kind of worked on the weed eater because I've convinced my wife that spraying Roundup along the fence line is better than using the weed eater. It's certainly less labor intensive, but I'm not sure she's still with me on that. But really, I mean, if you own a leaf blower, a weed eater, a lawnmower, a pressure washer, I hail from Sturgis, South Dakota. We have a lot of motorcyclists have talked to me about the ethanol and gasoline. Tennessee's a great hunting state. We have people who use four-wheelers. We have fishing boats. So can you talk to me a little bit about the impact on small engines and why people should be forced to deal with this?
Yeah, in that context, Congressman, I'm not an expert on small engines. Let me just say, when you look at the breadth and scope of everybody that's very concerned and in many instances opposed to what the mandates of the Renewable Fuel Standard are, this is clearly a focus on many people's minds. As I was in preparation for today, I was reading some material by some of the small engine manufacturers. For example, one piece of testimony, a direct quote from one who had a chainsaw that said these additional blends or these higher blends of ethanol make the machine run too hot. And on occasion, his chainsaw would engage whether he wanted it to or not in the course of doing his work. So clearly an adverse impact, particularly on the smaller engines, be they lawnmowers, weed whackers, whatever they might be. And we find in the marketplace, obviously, much like yourself, a lot of people come in and say, I don't want any blend in my fuel. I want the gasoline, because as the small engine repairmen and others are telling them, it won't hurt their product or the equipment they've paid so much money for. So generally speaking, yes, that whole group, the marine group, the motorboat group, the motorcyclist groups, they're all in part of a broader coalition seeking repeal and reform of the statute.
Okay, and I think you mentioned earlier the actual cost of producing a gallon of ethanol and blending it in is not cheaper than just regular gasoline.
That's correct. The thing to remember there, when you look at it on an energy content on a BTU basis, gasoline is generally always cheaper than ethanol. When you look at it on a volumetric basis, they'll say, well, no, ethanol is cheaper, but the reality is you don't get as much energy out of it.
Okay, let me ask one thing. I was recently traveling to South Dakota, and I had not seen these in Tennessee, but in Iowa, I saw my first pump that you could choose 10, 20, or 30% ethanol, and the 30% was the cheapest of the three. Does that make any sense at all to you then from what we just talked about from a cost standpoint?
It's hard to predict unless somebody has used that as a marketing tool, et cetera. As Lou talked about a little earlier, when you look at the heavier amounts of ethanol, like in E85, the consumer is telling us with their buying practices they don't want it. You look at Minnesota, you look at Iowa, the number of service stations that will sell the higher content fuels, the actual demand for the fuel is going down even though you're increasing the number of service stations. There's about 4% of our fleet today that are flex fuel vehicles that can burn it. Only about 1% of that 4% actually use it on a day-to-day basis. So consumers are deciding what they're going to buy, and regardless what the statute mandate or the EPA regulatory mandate is, that's the marketplace. We need to be thinking consumers, number 1, 2, and 3 in this discussion.
And that's what my consumers in Tennessee are telling me. So thank you for your input, and I yield back.